When we talk about Europe's housing market, we usually picture it as this one big cohesive thing, right? Well, the data, it tells a completely different story. A story that kind of suggests the whole idea of the European market might be a myth. So let's dive in and break this down.
So yeah, that brings us to the big question, the one this whole explainer is really about. Is there even such a thing as the European housing market? Or are we really just talking about a bunch of totally separate markets, all dancing to their own tune? And honestly, this quote from Wolf Richter over at Wolf Street just hits the nail on the head. He says they have not moved in lockstep. And let me tell you, as we're about to see, that is a massive understatement. All right, so to really get a feel for how wildly different these paths are, we're going to start with what I'm calling the rocket ships. These are the countries where housing prices didn't just, go up. They went stratospheric. They absolutely exploded. Just take a second and look at that number. 296%. That's not a typo. That is the actual growth in Hungary's housing market since 2010. Think about that for a second. Prices have almost quadrupled in a little over a decade. It's just wild. And Hungary is not some weird outlier here. I mean, look at this. The Czech Republic, prices there have jumped 162%. Portugal is up 150%. We're not just talking about good market gains here, This is a fundamental, ground-shaking shift in wealth, in affordability. It's the kind of thing that completely reshapes entire countries. Okay, so that's the story of the rocket ships. Now let's flip the coin and look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. For every single rocket ship, there's an anchor. We're talking about markets that look like they were completely left behind by the boom that was happening just, one or two countries over. So we just saw a number close to 300% growth. And now look at this. Zero, zilch, nada. That is the price change in Italy's housing market since 2010. Prices have gone nowhere. And think about it. When you factor in inflation, that means homes are actually cheaper today. It's a completely different planet.
And don't think this is just some long-term thing that's been happening over a decade. Oh no. Just look at this recent snapshot, year over year. In 1 year, Hungary's prices shot up over 21%. At the same time, in Finland, they actually dropped by more than 3%. I mean, come on. These are two countries in the same economic zone, flying in completely opposite directions. So you're probably wondering, what's going on in Finland? Well, it's basically a perfect storm of very local problems. You've got soaring interest rates that are crushing people with variable mortgages. Then there's a huge oversupply of new apartments hitting the market. And on top of that, people just don't have the purchasing power right now. It is the textbook example of how a country's own domestic issues can just completely ignore whatever else is happening in Europe. Okay, but just when you think you've got it figured out, boom here, stagnation there, the story throws another curveball at us. Because now, even some of those rocket ship markets, they're starting to feel a bit of a chill. It looks like that whole era of just nonstop, endless growth might finally be hitting a wall. And we're not talking about little blips here. Look at Germany. After climbing a whopping 85% since 2010, it's now down over 8% from its peak. Sweden is down over 6%, and Finland, wow, it has dropped 13% from its high. So what this tells us is that even inside that big growth story, a totally new chapter is being written, one about correction. So, okay, we've looked at the soaring highs, the stagnant lows, and now these new cooldowns. What's the big picture here? What's the one thing you should really walk away with after seeing all this? It really comes down to this. The key story, the headline. It isn't about growth or decline. It's about massive divergence. The markets across the continent are just splintering off in totally different directions. And because of that, trying to talk about a single European market, it just doesn't really make any sense anymore. I mean, just to wrap your head around it, think about the extremes we've seen. You've got the Hungarian boom, prices nearly quadrupling. Then you've got the Italian stagnation, prices literally going nowhere for over a decade. And then there's the Finnish correction, where people who bought at the peak are now seriously underwater. These are three completely different realities, all happening at the same time, all under this one umbrella we call Europe. And all of this leaves us with one last and pretty important question to think about. When you have national housing markets moving this far apart, when you have such disconnected economic realities playing out across the very same continent, who gets left behind?